What's up guys, back with another video. For those of you new to the channel, I typically do more longer form informative content. I think a 2-minute video or a 5-minute video is just simply not enough time to really get into a topic in the amount of depth that is needed to really inform you to make the best decisions in your training. So I typically do at least 10-minute videos, sometimes 15, 20, even 30-minute videos, just to get you the information that you need to really benefit from it. However, I can always promise that it won't be a lot of fluff or BS content. You could be spending your time anyway, but you're spending it here, and I value your time, so I make sure not to waste it. With all that being said, let's get right into the video. So, how to make low volume training work for you. Now, you might have seen some recent studies, or maybe you haven't, about how volume is going to be the main driver of hypertrophy. So the more sets you do, the more benefit you get. Let's take a look at this and see if it's actually true. Because if this was true, how can you make good progress on a low volume program? Well, first of all, a lot of these studies, they don't really show the whole picture. So they might show someone going to failure, but this is always volitional failure. So volitional failure is when someone fails because they chose to stop the set. It's not because they actually failed. You know, if there was a gun to their head, they could have gotten more reps. They could have trained harder than last time, but they didn't. And this is going to be most people. Keep in mind that most studies are on either the untrained, the elderly, or if they are quote unquote trained, they are usually very weak. You know, they might have like a 145-pound bench press, and that is considered trained because they've trained before. I would argue that these types of people are not going to push themselves as hard as they probably could. So if you see a study and it says 5 sets to failure are better than 1 set to failure, you might have to take into account that maybe, just maybe, these sets aren't actually to failure. They are close to failure. And if someone is doing, 5 reps away from failure, yes, the volume is going to be more effective just because it's more. However, if you are going to true failure, and I mean like true failure, the last rep is a total and complete grinder, well, you probably won't be able to do as much volume. And this brings me to my first point. If you are doing just 1 set per exercise and you want to progress, you need to go close to failure, if not to failure, and possibly even past failure. There are a few protocols that I'll talk about later where you are actually going past failure. You're going to failure, and then you are going into the great beyond failure. And this can be very effective to stimulate hypertrophy. So if you look at this graphic, it shows that pretty clearly more volume is going to be more effective. However, you have to look at the lines above. The lines above are going to be individuals. And you can see some people are actually getting quite good results from this 1 set to failure. You can see some of those lines are tilted up quite a bit. So some people actually did quite well on this 1 set to failure. You can also see that there are some lines in the 5 sets per week that actually are pretty flat. They actually gained very, very little muscle. On the whole, the trend is upwards. However, you might be one of those individuals who handles volume maybe not as well. And so you might actually be, ideal to use a lower volume program. Typically speaking, the harder you push a set, the fewer sets you can do. So if you're doing like 10 sets per workout, by definition, you are not going to be able to push each set. I don't care who you are, how mentally strong you are. If you know you have 10 sets to do, you're going to be holding back on at least some of those sets. However, if you know that you have 1 set to get it done, you only have that 1 set to really stimulate progress and stimulate hypertrophy and strength, you know that you're going to push it. You're going to push it super hard because that is your only opportunity for the day to get it done. And I've had great success on low volume programs where it's just 1 set of 20 reps in the squat to get it done. So if you can push yourself really, really, really hard, a low volume training program could be effective because you have to be able to push yourself very hard. And I would actually recommend that intermediate athletes try a low volume program just because it forces you to learn how to train really, really hard for one set. I've seen people who thought they were training hard and they were just doing volume. And then I said, okay, try a one set protocol. And they said, I'll never be able to progress. But they did once they learned how to push that one set and how to really get fired up, amped up, and really attack the set just for that one set. Another consideration is exercise selection. If you're doing a low volume program, you really need to choose the best exercises. So don't be dicking around with isolation BS. You really need to choose the biggest movements that are going to give you the most benefit. So squats, deadlifts, RDLs, back extensions, rows, pull-ups, bench press, dips. Those are going to be the main meat of your program. If you're doing, sets to failure and you're using a machine or you're using isolation movements, you're really just not going to get that much out of it. You need to be overloading the body in a systemic way. Another consideration is frequency. So if you're training just with one set, you can and you should do higher frequency. One set once per week is really not going to get good results because you're growing for like a couple days, but then, on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're not only not growing, but you're potentially losing those gains. So you go up a little bit, then you flatline, then you might be going back down. So you're going forward 3 steps, and then back 2 steps, or maybe even back 3 steps if you're in a situation like where you're dieting or your sleep is bad or you're stressed out and your cortisol is high. So I think it's important to have higher frequency. You can and should work out at least twice per week and probably 3 times per week on a one set protocol. And this is going to ensure that you're always growing throughout the week. So if you work out, say, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you're doing this one set protocol, say full body workouts, that can work amazingly well. The old school squats and milk program, which I'll get into a little bit later, that is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. DC training is also going to be pretty high frequency. So you really do have to have high frequency to offset the lower volume per workout. You also should be doing multiple exercises. You can't just do one exercise for your back. The back is a very complicated area, and you're probably going to need to do 2, 3, 4 exercises, even if they're hard, even if they're to failure, in order to fully stimulate the back. The lats, the rhomboids, the traps, the spinal erectors, the rear delts, all of these need individual targeted exercises to really see complete development. And this is especially true on a low volume protocol because you really need to attack an area from multiple angles. Probably the most important factor is going to be progressive overload. All of these people who are saying volume is the main driver of hypertrophy, they're looking at studies that are 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe 10 weeks. That is not a lot of time. For me personally, I don't care where I am in 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks. I care where I am in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And so you really have to look at a more long-term approach. A lot of these gains in hypertrophy are actually glycogen and inflammation. Because you're doing more volume, your body is going to adapt and store more glycogen. And this is technically muscle growth. It appears to be muscle growth because it is in the muscle. It is, carbohydrates, it is water, it is bloat in the muscle. And it measures, as muscle, it measures as inches, it measures as cross-sectional area. However, there's also inflammation. So when you're doing more volume, you're getting more cell swelling. You're getting more actually tissue damage and growth that is just bloat and inflammation. And this, it shows up as hypertrophy. Is it really hypertrophy? I would argue no, because it goes away after you stop this low volume training, or after this high volume training, rather. It's also very easy to flatline off of a high volume program. So you might see great growth off of like a few weeks, but after that few weeks, you might stagnate just because you've already triggered that glycogen, you've already triggered that pathway to growth, and now you need to progressively overload, but you can't do so because you're training with too much volume. So I would say in the long run, progressive overload is absolutely going to be the best way. And progressive overload can be done with low volume. In fact, I would argue that it's actually easier to do with low volume because you don't have as much fatigue. You're pushing really hard on this one set and you're looking to get stronger from the last week, but you don't have a ton of fatigue because your volume is lower. So the key when you're doing a low volume program is to keep a training log. You absolutely should keep a training log. I'll link to a video in the description that details what you should track and some tips and advice for keeping a training log. But you really do need to try to beat the book. You want to get better than last week. You want to improve over time and get stronger. I don't care what anyone says. If you put 100 pounds on your 20 rep max squat, I don't care how much volume you're doing, you will grow. Your legs will get freaking huge. It's just going to be, what happens as an adaptation to getting that much stronger at reps. No matter how much volume you're doing, it's just going to work. Another advantage is the time consideration. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm really busy and I can't spend 2 hours a day in the gym. I need to get in, get out, and then get back to working with clients or writing or doing some other projects, like making YouTube videos. If you're really busy, a low volume program is going to be awesome just because you don't have to be there for hours and hours. If you're doing 12 sets of bench press, that is going to take a lot of time. If you're doing 1 or 2 sets of bench press, it's obviously going to take less time. So how to set up an ideal low volume training program? Well, there have been quite a few iterations over the years. One of the original ones was Mike Mentzer, who did his heavy duty training. The problem with him, he seems like a nice guy, a little weird, but seemed like a cool dude. The big problem with his training was that, one, he went way overboard. So he would go to failure, and then he would do like forced reps, negative reps, drop sets, just like attacking the muscle until it was just destroyed. Then he would only train every 2 weeks at some points. So he would do this one all-out set, and then he wouldn't train for 2 weeks. And this only really works when you're on steroids, which he obviously was. If you're not on steroids, you need to trigger muscle protein synthesis more often. And so it simply won't work training every 2 weeks. It just doesn't. Now, obviously this can work. He's pretty jacked himself. But again, steroids is going to be a big factor. Plus, I don't think it's sustainable. After he lost to Arnold Schwarzenegger, who took a more volume-based approach, he retired and he barely trained again. So I think if you want a sustainable long-term approach, this sort of like destroy the muscle every 2 weeks type of thing, it just isn't really a good option. Another option is Dorian Yates' style of training. So he also went to failure. He also did low volume, but he seemed to be a little bit more intelligent in his approach. He took a slightly higher volume approach. He obviously is also on steroids, a lot of steroids, or at least was. And I think this is a better approach, but maybe still not optimal, especially if you're natural. You want a little bit higher frequency, and you still need to be aware that you could get injured, especially as you get stronger. Another variation that I've used in the past and I really, really like is called DC training. This stands for dog crap training. It's made by Dante Trudel. And this is where the frequency is slightly higher, but it still endorses the sort of one set to failure ethos, basically. So basically it is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, workout A, B, A. So you're hitting every muscle roughly once every 5 days. And this is a pretty decent amount of frequency. It's not super high, but it's a little bit higher than once per week. And so basically you do what is called rest pause. So you go to failure or close to failure, then you rest about 15 seconds, then you take the same weight and you go to failure again. You're not going to get as many reps because you're fatigued. Then you rest another 15 seconds and you go to failure or close to failure again. So it is set, rest, set, rest, set. And this is very effective because you're going to failure, you're really stimulating the muscle. However, it is not complete overkill. You're not like going to failure, then slow eccentrics and drop sets and really just destroying the muscle. You're stimulating the muscle, and you can really see some great results by doing this. I've done this in the past a few times, and I've always seen pretty rapid muscle growth. I also really like the exercise selection. It all seems pretty reasonable. All of the exercises seem to be well chosen, and it is somewhat flexible. So it gives you the options to choose your own exercises. Because you have my book, of course, you have so many options that you can use, and I really like how it's just like a template. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do, but it gives you some options and some choices about how to customize it for yourself. And if you look at most good training programs, that is what they do. They give you the options, and it's a little bit open-ended. So you don't like have only one option for a bench press. You can choose, paused reps or incline or dumbbells or some other variation like machines. And my personal experience with this was very positive. So in about 2 months, I turned my sumo 2-rep max into my 12-rep max, my squats from 2 reps to 6 reps, rows from 2 to 12, pull-ups 4 to 10, incline bench press from 8 to 16, press from 5 to 9 reps, and high pull from 3 reps to 12 reps. So as long as you keep attacking the weight and really trying to use, get more reps and use heavier loading, I think a low volume program can work really well. But you have to have the mentality of getting stronger, of overloading the muscle each session. If you're not willing to push as close to failure, perhaps a more volume-based approach is going to be more effective, just because you're not going close to failure and you actually need more volume to fully stimulate progress. So again, there's going to be an inverse relationship between how close to failure and how many sets you do. If you're doing all your sets to failure and you're doing volume, you're just going to burn out. If you're doing only one set and you're not going to failure, well, you're just not going to stimulate progress. So if you're doing high volume, you need to do, not quite to failure. And if you're doing low volume, you must go to failure, or at least very close. Also keep in mind there's going to be some individual variation. So I've seen success with this. Many people have seen success on a low volume approach, but it is quite individual. So you might be someone who maybe you're more slow twitch, or maybe you simply prefer not to go to failure, or maybe you simply handle volume better. You might, want a more volume-based approach. So I would suggest that you try both. So try low volume, try high volume, and see which you prefer. It's your training, and you should enjoy it. You don't have to necessarily do what is going to be optimal. You should also enjoy your training. And if you enjoy higher volume, then that is going to be what you should do. Even if it doesn't provide, the best possible top 1% gains, if you enjoy it, do it. Also, you can do both. There's no reason that you have to do only one of them. You can take a phase of higher volume training where you're doing, let's say 4 sets of 10 or 5 sets of 10 or 5 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 20 or whatever it is that you choose. Then you can take a short deload once you've accumulated a lot of fatigue and stimulated the muscle, etc. Then you can switch to a more low volume approach. During this time, you are really focused on overloading the muscle, on progressively overloading and getting stronger. And so you're focused on different things at different times. In the beginning, you're focused on volume, then you switch and you're more focused on overload. And these actually support themselves very well, because during the volume phase, you are accumulating fatigue, you're working on your technique, you're getting in a lot of sets, a lot of practice, then you use that and you almost like springboard into this low volume phase. And during this phase, you actually realize a lot of those gains that you made earlier in that first phase. Ultimately, it is your training, your body, your choice, etc. And you should constantly and continually be experimenting with your training in order to get the best results. A study is a good guideline, but you really do need to have experience and either work with a coach or train yourself in order to find what works best for you. Alright, that is all for today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you made it to the end, I applaud your old school attention span. Good job, that is quite rare in this day and age. Stay safe wherever you are, and I will see you next time. Peace.